Hello. The video you are currently watching is a longer version of a presentation that I gave at the 88th annual meeting of the Society for American Archaeology, Portland, Oregon. My name is Luke Stroth. I'm a PhD candidate at the Department of Anthropology at the University of California, San Diego. In this presentation, I describe the methods that I used to create 3D models of these ceramic artifacts. In particular, I focus on troubleshooting, what common problems I encountered, and how I attempted to solve them. The target audience for this presentation is really anyone using photogrammetry, but I hope I make a successful case for the value of photogrammetry to documenting small artifacts in archaeological study. Also, one of the primary deliverables of my dissertation will be a digital database of the over 500 3D models that I have of Southern Belize pottery. I hope that such a database will be a contribution to ceramic studies and facilitate comparison of material between sites even when travel to the different sites is not possible. I have a long-term interest in expanding this database to include material from other Maya sites as well as Mesoamerica in particular. I will give a brief overview of the archaeological background, but my primary goal here is to show the workflow. So this ceramic material, it comes from southern Belize. It comes from a site called Nimli Punit. It's a classic Maya center occupied approximately 250 to 830 AD. It's one of 5 large sites that we have in southern Belize. There are many smaller household sites, Ishkukil, excavated by Amy Thompson, for example. But the sites from west to east, Pusulha, Ushbenka, Lubantun, Shnaheb, and Nimlipunit, these are the 5 Toledo centers that people often talk about when they talk about the southern Belize region. Some characteristics they have in common: walled ball courts, the incorporation of natural hilltops into architecture, and some idiosyncratic lunar calendar dates. Doctors Heather McKillop and E. Corey Sills have documented occupation along the coast and identified economic links between coastal sites and inland centers. Work at Ushbenka by Dr. Keith Proofer and at Ishkukul and Muklabaltsul by Dr. Amy Thompson has provided insight into the relationship between these centers and the hinterland, with Keith now shedding light on the earliest archaic period inhabitants of the Toledo district. The Toledo Regional Interaction Project has worked at Pusilha, Lubantun, and Nimli Punit, focusing on the latter site since 2010. Some great ceramic studies has been done in the past 10 years, and I am particularly grateful to Dr. Jillian M. Jordan's 2019 dissertation. I want to make the point here that archaeology is a team sport, in the field, in the lab, and in the writing, and I hope this video is in some way a worthy contribution. I don't want to get too much into the weeds on the archaeology here because I suppose I got to save something for my dissertation, but I do want to make the point that Nimli Punit is an exciting site and worthy of study. It exhibits the strongest evidence in the southern Belize region for distant political and economic ties. Ceramics indicate ties to or knowledge of Teotihuacan at about AD 400. The famous wind jewel implies dynastic ties to Cajalpech and possibly to Caracol in the 7th century, and several 8th century hieroglyphic texts mention ex-Shukpi lords, who are later attested at Quirigua, as well as the water scroll site. Throughout its history, the pottery of Nimli Punit reflects its wider ceramic connections, but all the sites seem to have developed ceramic ties with Western Belize during the period of contraction and collapse, circa AD 780 to 850. One of the reasons that I really like 3D modeling for pottery analysis is just considering the way that the contention, rather, in much pottery classification and the importance of periodic conferences to establish types and resolve controversies. This is in part due to certain inconsistencies in how types, varieties, modes, etc. are classified. And on the right there, there's a figure that kind of lays out my intentions. Once again, we don't need to get too into the weeds. The primary focus here is on methods. Nevertheless, one of the things I want to emphasize is that because of the sometimes subjective nature of ceramic analysis, these periodic conferences are necessary in order to directly compare collections and resolve such inconsistencies. I hope I make a successful case in this presentation that digital databases, such as the one I'm making for my dissertation, will not replace these conferences because it's necessary to directly compare materials before making a final type assignment. But I hope it will at least supplement them, be useful to ceramicists, and perhaps provide a stopgap when traveling or moving material from country to country is not possible. So that's a quick rundown of the archaeological context, why I hope photogrammetry is a useful contribution to ceramic documentation, and now we will proceed to the original video.
These illustrations are produced through structure from motion photography, or photogrammetry. You're probably familiar with the basic concept, creating a 3D model from many photographs taken from multiple points of view. The term photogrammetry originally referred to taking measurements of an object through analysis of photographs, which is as old as photography itself. Structure from motion photography, or automated photogrammetry, refers to making 3D models from a series of photographs. Measurements are derived by identifying common points in each photograph and measuring how they move from perspective to perspective. This method was developed in the early 2000s. There are many good studies that demonstrate the accuracy of models created through SfM Photogrammetry. My colleague Mario Barrero and I hosted a symposium in 2019 developing a set of best practices for reporting error rates. We emphasize transparency in decision-making and responsible data storage. After developing a curation plan, the workflow consists of initial photography, color correction, alignment, dense cloud generation, mesh generation, and the export of final products. Let's watch a quick video walkthrough of an idealized workflow. We can view photographs in software. You can see I did multiple circuits of this rim sherd, which comes from Tomb 5 in Nimli Punit, it's vessel number 9, a micaceous red-slipped flat-based bowl. To generate a sparse cloud of tie points, I ran the alignment on the highest setting, which resulted in only half of the photos aligning. This is a common problem. You can see that, in this case, as I rotate the model, despite appearing to have shape information, it lacks thickness. A possible fix is to rerun alignment at a lower setting, in this case medium. Happily, all but one photo aligned here, giving us the full shape of the sherd. But because of the lower alignment setting, this generates a lot of loose points surrounding the model, which I call flash after the excess plastic that accumulates on mold-injected model sprues. To remove some of this flash, I used gradual selection to remove points with a high reprojection error. The remaining flash is selected by hand and deleted. Next, I generate the dense cloud, which for this demo I ran on high. Make sure to check the box to calculate point confidence, which will be relevant later. To cut down on noise, I bumped up depth filtering from mild to aggressive. This dense cloud looks pretty good, and you could be forgiven for thinking it was the final model. But if we zoom in, we would see it's still a point cloud. There is some flash around the edges of the sherd. How can we clean that up? I've set the view here to show confidence calculated for each point, and in Dense Cloud Tools, displayed only those with confidence less than 1. Tools, Dense Cloud, Filter by confidence. I went ahead and deleted those, reset the filter, and here we are with a pretty cool looking dense cloud. Next step is to generate mesh. I enabled interpolation to help fill in empty areas of the model. The resulting mesh looks pretty good. We're going to export the model as a 3D PDF, which we'll label with the name of the model to associate it with the artifact. Let's take a peek at the model here. What essential information being communicated is shape, texture, and scale. I can send this model as an email attachment to another ceramicist to ask for their feedback, and they could download this model to use it as a reference later down the road. The next step is to produce some ortho photos, which are stitched together from the model's geometry and the surface of the photos. There's a bit of black flash around the edges, but you can clean that up in Photoshop. Here's the best part. It's an end to drawing rim profiles. I make a duplicate chunk and create a cross-section of the model. I then export this as an ortho mosaic at the same scale as the previous ortho photos. I can include them both in a single illustration. This is a simple, successful model. Let's take a look at the workflow in more detail. Taking good photos is the best way to get good models. Often, issues in modeling can be avoided through photography hygiene. These photos were taken in the round using a turntable and a black background. Rather than trying to move your body around the object as a person might when photographing a building, The camera remains stable while the object moves. Repositioning the object after each circuit will get you complete coverage of its surface, with 2 or 3 complete circuits at different angles. I used a stand to keep the sherds upright, making sure the stand was not present in any of the photographs. I captured photos in a dark room, often at night, to control lighting, which was usually provided by a camera-mounted lumen cube or ring light. I would take a photo with a color checker in case any corrections needed to be made. The camera was set to capture both JPEGs and RAW files that were not subject to post-processing algorithms default to the camera. Although this increased total file size, it allowed us to color correct and recalibrate photos to create better models. This is something to consider when developing your data management plans. The raw files became the object of curation. We can always create another model. It's important to make sure your photos are in focus and that there is at least 60% overlap from one photo to another. That said, certain artifacts are easier to document through SfM photography. For example, pots with complex, non-repeating painted designs, such as this vessel recovered from Tomb 5 at Nimli Punit, provide the software with many tie points with which to match different images. Compare that result to the pot on the right, which was Vessel 25, also from Tomb 5, a Belize red piriform vase. In this case, the software had difficulty finding tie points within that matte red slip that covered much of the surface of the sherd. Compare also to the incised rim of Tomb 5 Vessel 21, a cream-slipped vase. Although the motif is repeated, the design is asymmetrical, and it was only necessary to apply control points to help the software align the front and the back of the sherd. The thin edges, like those seen on Vessel 21, present a problem for sudden shifts in perspective. Generally speaking, the thicker the sherd, the easier it is to document, and as you rotate it, you'll give the software plenty of tie points that overlap between the edge of the sherd and the interior and exterior walls. Thin-walled sherds result in more extreme edges with fewer tie points. These sherds were rotated at the same angle, but the thinner sherd provided more extreme shifts in perspective, which give fewer overlapping tie points for the software to map the geometry. Thus, a common problem is that the software only produces half a sherd because it doesn't have enough tie points to connect the interior to the exterior. Depending on your lighting setup, it is also difficult for a thin edge and the body of the sherd to both be in focus. A ring light can really help with that. A similar challenge is documenting the interior and exterior of whole vessels, particularly when the orifice is restricted. It can be difficult to properly capture the interior geometry, or when the interior geometry is present, to connect it to the exterior. I have found that the best way to deal with this is adding control points at the bottom of the vessel and a series of control points along the interior wall to provide depth and proportion between the interior and exterior walls. It's also important to have a good set of circuits along the rim with control points overlapping the interior and exterior rims. With complete vessels, the rim is often the only connection point between the interior and exterior walls, so it must be completely documented, with control points that establish proportional thickness of the neck, shoulder, and base. For this reason, it's actually easier to document fragmentary or broken vessels, because then you have shots that show the exterior wall in relation to the interior wall and control points that can wrap around holes in the vessel. Another problem that can occur is when an object is transparent or partially reflective. This may result in mismatched tie points between different photos. This is really more of a problem when documenting lithic artifacts, but also for some pottery, such as this micaceous Peluakosh style rim sherd. For the most part, you can control for this issue through lighting conditions and or color correcting in Lightroom as mentioned previously. If you are interested in working with lithic material and are concerned about translucency, I would refer you to Porter et al. 2016. The last bit of pre-troubleshooting photography hygiene is color correction using Lightroom or equivalent software. Because I was able to take photos in controlled conditions, in practice I could generally skip this step. But it is something to consider as the final stage of pre-processing hygiene. These steps can help prevent issues from arising later. Nevertheless, errors can still occur at any point in the process, so let's take a look at how to deal with any problems that may arise during model generation. Misalignment happens for various reasons. An unintuitive one is when pictures have too much of the background present, and the software will try and find tie points within the shared black backdrops from photo to photo. This produces a lot of flash and makes proper alignment difficult. When I see many photos in which the shirt does not make up the majority of the frame, I usually decide to mask out the backgrounds using the Magic Wand tool. The most recent version of Metashape Pro is very good at removing backgrounds from photos, but this can also occur prior to loading the photographs into the software. A colleague of ours, who also participated in the 2019 symposium, Leszek Palowicz, recommended using the PowerPoint background eraser tool. If the object is visually homogeneous, the software will need some help identifying tie points. If there are not control points on the object itself, you can add markers to each image during post-processing. If you experience alignment failure even with control points, it may be because you missed a shift in perspective during photography and the shirred edges misalign. This can lead to a case of what I call exploded shirred syndrome. This video shows two classic cases of exploded shirred syndrome, or misalignment, between the interior and exterior of the shirt. In order to treat this problem, I prescribe markers. These are control points you add to the photos to help the software recognize tie points, or potential tie points. This video shows a selection of the photos with my markers added. When running the alignment on medium with pre-selection on, all 57 cameras aligned. Although the resulting sparse cloud looks much better, there is clearly some flash, linear distortion, and doubling at the rim. To target these problematic points, I use the gradual selection tool. I selected points by reconstruction uncertainty, which is a measure of the triangulation error in tie point orientation. I set the threshold to 50 and deleted those points, then removed the rest of the flash by hand. In this second example, notice that 42 out of 43 of the cameras did align, so from the software's perspective, this was a successful project. Agisoft tried to match the control points I'd added to the interior and exterior of the shirt, which tells us I should have placed more unique control points, a mistake on my part. In this case, the markers I added in software were not successful, so it's time for plan B. I ran the interior and exterior of the shirt as separate projects, or chunks. I ran them both on highest with pre-selection on, and in both cases all cameras aligned. Then I aligned and proceeded to merge the chunks. Rather than aligning all the photos and falling victim to my poorly thought out control points, this time the software had two shirred halves with complete geometry and was able to match edge to edge. Another common occurrence is the presence of one or more linear distortions, or the doubling of a particular feature, commonly the rim. This is a result of reconstruction uncertainty within the tie points. In this video, you can see the strong linear distortion that crosscuts the shirt. Once again, I'm using the gradual selection tool to target specifically points that exhibit high triangulation errors. A threshold of 50 is usually sufficient to cut out most linear distortions. When there are no obvious linear distortions, I have sometimes removed points with a reconstruction uncertainty higher than 150, but this is largely redundant by targeting points with a high reprojection error. Selecting points by reprojection error will increase accuracy for models without obvious geometry distortion, and selecting points by reconstruction uncertainty will help to remove linear distortions or doubled features. In this example, I use reconstruction uncertainty to remove some doubling of the interior of the shirt with the added bonus of removing some background noise. When no distortion is apparent in the basic geometry, I usually only delete points with a high reprojection error. Reprojection error refers to the difference between the anticipated location of a tie point and the projected location. Points with high reprojection error may be false matches that could result from out-of-focus imaging or poor lighting. In my experience, a well-cleaned sparse cloud will rarely encounter new problems in the dense cloud, the next step of the process. Nevertheless, some errors will still compound, particularly excess flash from the backdrop, so let's take a look at how to keep the dense cloud clean. In this problem, we see excessive flash and some doubling of the shirt body around the rim. There are a few ways to deal with this issue. First, to remove points below a certain confidence threshold. Confidence threshold refers to the number of depth maps used in generating these point locations. I change my view from color to confidence. Under the Tools drop-down menu, you navigate to dense cloud, then select filter points by confidence. Let's set our threshold to 1. Now only those points are displayed, and we select them all and delete them. Here's another example of black flash that can accumulate in the dense cloud. This probably could have been avoided through masking the background out prior to running alignment, but as seen here, there's a handy function under Tools, Dense Cloud, Select Points by Color. We set the chroma to 00000, the default setting. Tolerance refers to how discriminating the software will be, and you'll have to find the right tolerance for the specific project. Generally, 80% will get rid of the background without affecting the model itself. In this case, I have to bump it up all the way to 100 to get rid of the flash clinging to the bottom right corner of the shirt. Incidentally, this is why I prefer to use black backgrounds. The color expression of black backgrounds is less affected by lighting conditions than white backgrounds, and so they are easier to mask and remove when selecting by color. Another problem that occurs during dense cloud processing is smearing of a sherd. In the previous examples, certain parts of the model may be doubled or distorted. Selecting by confidence will remove those problem areas. In this example, the model is not distorted, but rather smeared across space. This is often due to processing settings, specifically depth filtering. The software produces a depth map for each image to populate the dense cloud. Depth filtering can be applied to reduce noisy points projecting at greater distances than in reality. This flat-shot model shows a good example of the smearing effect. If you look at the settings at the bottom left corner of the screen, I ran this dense cloud on ultra-high with depth filtering set to mild. In another window, I've run a new version of the model in a merged chunk. I'm taking notes in my spreadsheet here, and getting ready to move to dense cloud processing. I'm playing with gradual selection so you can see how the different settings interact, but I've already removed reconstruction uncertainty greater than 50, so I'm just removing wayward points by hand and a little bit of the backdrop to cut down on processing time. Save the project and take notes. Always save as often as possible. Then we set the dense cloud processing settings. After the dense cloud has been generated, you can see how much better it looks than the original. I recommend running depth filtering on aggressive for almost all models. If the dense cloud isn't dense enough, you can rerun it on moderate. Disabling the depth filter will result in a complete mess of a model. Mild filtering may be preferred when small details or thin features are being documented, and these features may be edited out by more aggressive filtering presets. Situations where depth filtering is especially important are in these flat shots and projects in which the background takes up a lot of space in component photos. Once again, I recommend masking out the background in those cases. This example is a jade celt recovered from Tomb 5. I've run the project on 3 different alignments and combined the chunks to increase the number of tie points. This has resulted in a slightly distorted dense cloud, so once again, we are visualizing confidence and removing those points that are based on less than one depth map. Some shape distortion remains, less on the celt than the surface, so we try something a little different. After removing some flash by hand, I also remove the points with confidence less than 2 from the celt while leaving the scale bar intact. Note I'm keeping notes as I go. I'm documenting the decision-making process. The mesh is generated. It looks alright with a bit of distortion on the scale bar. Notice how well the edge of the celt overlaps the scale bar, whereas earlier versions of the model compress those into a single feature. Here's the rim sherd from Vessel 24 again. It's time for me to generate some 3D model and orthomosaics that I can use to create illustrations for my dissertation and upload to the online database. The first step is to generate the orthomosaic of the exterior to capture the painted details. Then we want the rim profile, so we'll make a copy of the chunk to make a cross section. This is going to be the same scale as the previous model. We'll rotate the cross-section into place and generate an orthomosaic. Although there is some noise within the profile, when I trace the profile in Illustrator, the interior will be shaded anyway. Notice that I'm saving the orthos as both JPEGs and TIFF files, and then we also export the model as a 3D PDF, so we have multiple representations of the shirt in 2 and 3 dimensions. These orthomosaics can also be used to make cylindrical rollouts that approximate rollout photography pioneered by Justin Kerr. This rollout is from Tomb 5, Vessel 3, a Zacatel cream bowl that exhibits the vertical bar and rounded design over white background, which helps characterize this type. This rollout shows Tomb 5, Vessel 4, which exhibits a monkey motif common in Lower Central America and also present in mortuary and votive contexts amongst the Maya from the 8th to the 10th centuries. Although this rollout appears distorted, in fact, the rim was asymmetrical, which was not unusual for Nimli Punet pottery. Remember that New World pottery is often created without the wheel, and in the case of Nimli Punet, we have several rims that are asymmetrical and appear to slant in cross-section. To conclude, photogrammetry serves as a great way to document ceramic artifacts, and I hope it will be beneficial for the field of ceramic studies, in particular, the ability to access a reference collection without having to leave the lab. The database will help to demonstrate the ways that the potters in Nimli Punet incorporated motifs and themes from the larger Maya world into their domestic ceramic economy. It is my hope that digital databases will become a standard for the field of ceramic studies. Thank you very much for your time. I value any feedback that you would happen to have. Any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to reach out to me at lstroth@ucsd.edu or just Google Luke Stroth, and I'm sure you'll find my contact information. Thank you for your time.